Okay, so welcome to our travel proxy refresher training today. And I am joining us today is Jade Norris. She is our travel manager, and Kathy Blackburn, who is our general accounting director. And so I'm going to pass it over to Jade, and she is going to get started.
All right, thank you, Joanne. I really appreciate that. I just want to welcome you all to our travel proxy refresher training. Like Joanne said, my name is Jade Narashone. I'm the travel manager here at the university. And so myself and the two other members of my staff, Megan Dozier and Thurman Taylor, are the people that you need to contact. Or if you have any travel questions, we're the people you want to come to. And after travel was suspended last year because of COVID and not many people were processing it, we thought it would be best to have a little travel refresher for everyone, so that way, if you haven't processed travel in quite a while, this will be a way for you to get your feet wet, back into travel and all that kind of stuff.
Hey Jade, saying that it's really hard to hear.
Okay.
There's a lot of background noise.
Okay. Let me move my computer a little bit closer to me because that's where my mic is. All right. Is that better?
That is better.
Okay, good. All right. So I had to move it because of the way my desk is set up. But I'm sorry about that. So I just want to welcome you all to our travel proxy refresher training. I appreciate you all joining us today. I think this will be a good way for you to get your feet wet if you haven't processed some travel in quite a while. And so what we're going to go through today, just to give you sort of a little idea of our topics of discussion, is we're going to be talking about employee travel. We'll be talking about updating banking information, travel authorizations or TAs, travel advances, expense reports, and then I'm also going to demonstrate in the training environment how to create a travel authorization and also how to create an expense report in case you haven't done that in quite a while for travel. Then we'll also discuss non-employee and student travel. So we'll talk about creating travel authorizations for students on the Finance Intranet, travel reimbursement vouchers, the form that you need to submit in order to reimburse students and non-employees for their travel expenses. And also, I'm going to demonstrate how to complete a travel authorization form on the Finance Intranet for students and non-employees. Finally, we'll go through the fan running in the background is actually the fan of my computer. I can't do anything about that. So there's not anything I can do to make the fan for the PC go off. That's really the best I can do. I don't have a headset, so that's the little bit of noise in the background is really all. I can't do anything about that at this point. So back to our topics of discussions. We'll be talking about policies and procedures, some little do's and don'ts, and then finally at the end we'll take questions. All right. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about is employee travel. The first step that all employees need to do in order to make sure that they're valid for expenses so that you as proxies can access them in PeopleSoft is to update their banking information. And the navigation to do that to be able to for your employees to add their banking information is to go main menu, employee self-service, travel and expense, review edit profile. And when they're in the review edit profile page, the USC bank account tab is what they need to click on so that way they'll be able to access their profile and enter their banking information. And they need to enter in their bank name, the routing number, and then their account number. And they also need to check if it's check the box if it's either checking or savings, so that way they're make sure once that's saved, that way they'll be valid for expenses and you're able to find them in the system. So this is really the first step that all employees need to do. This validates the employees or travelers and allows transactions to be completed on their behalf. And the importance of this is because all payments for the expense module are made via direct deposit. There are no checks that go out. So just make sure that, if you have any new employees, that they do this before you try to process expenses for them in the expense module. or if you have any employees that maybe have switched their bank account, in the last year or two, and they want to use a new one for their travel expenses to be deposited, they need to make sure that they make that update themselves. So that's the first step that all employees need to do. Then when the other second type of transaction that employees can, or really the first type of transactions that employees can have processed for them in PeopleSoft is a travel authorization or a TA. The navigation to create a TA is main menu, employee self-service, travel and expense, travel authorization, and create modify. And when you get to this particular page, you'll be able to find the employee that you're trying to process travel for by using their USCID or their name. There's various different ways to do it. And then you can create that travel authorization for them. Now, there are 4 policy reasons from the university's perspective as to why you would need an approved travel authorization. So any expenses that are $5,000 or greater, so the estimated expenses are over that $5,000 threshold, it will require an approved travel authorization. All foreign travel, so to travel to any international destination, it's going to require an approved travel authorization. All travel advances require an approved TA, and then any airline tickets issued by a university approved travel agency and charged against that TA are going to require an approved TA. And this is the one where we probably have the most problems because we get quite a few invoices every month from our Diners Club where people charge airfare. And before those purchases can be made, the travel authorization needs to be fully approved in order for it to comply with policy. With travel authorizations, they always need to be future dated using the actual business dates of travel. In the report description for the travel authorization, you want to include the destination and date in the report so that way, when you're looking at a list of travel authorizations, it's easy to pick out the one that you want to be able to associate to your expense report after the trip is complete. The account code for all employee travel is 52024. It does not matter the destination. This is the account code that you want to use for employee travel. When a TA has been associated to an expense report, it is no longer available to be used. So TAs and expense reports have a one-to-one relationship, so just keep that in mind. And an approved TA encumbers the amount of money on your budget, so that way it's set aside for that particular travel. So that way you'll be able to get a better idea when you're looking at your accounting and your budget details to see how much money has been allocated to travel. The second type of transaction that can happen in PeopleSoft is a travel advance. The navigation for that is main menu, employee self-service, travel and expense, USC travel advances, and create modify. Now, for a travel advance, an approved TA is required. The travel advance can be issued for up to 70% of the estimated lodging and meals up to an amount of $3,000. If there's going to be any difference in that, like it's going to go over that $3,000 amount, you really want to reach out to the travel office to have so that way we can discuss the issues and go forward from there. We're assessing a case-by-case basis. The way travel advances work is only one advance can be requested and paid out at a time, and that advance must be applied to an expense report or repaid. So basically, once money's been advanced out and paid, it has to be reconciled and taken care of before any other transactions can happen in PeopleSoft. The way advances work is they're paid 10 days prior to the start of travel. And the advance, once the travel is complete, the advance will be applied to the first available expense report, so that way it can be reconciled. And the account code for a travel advance is 10206. So that's just keep that in mind. And then the last type of transaction that can happen for employees in PeopleSoft is an expense report. And the expense report navigation is main menu, employee self-service, travel and expense report, create modify. Now, expense reports are always submitted after the trip is complete. You want to use the actual business dates of travel, so the dates they actually were away on their business trip. For the meals, you want to use 3 expense lines for meals in your expense report. And this way you can have, like, this is basically best practices of how you want to divide up the meals. So the first line would be dated the first day of travel, and it would make sure to include the time of departure, so what time that particular traveler left on that first day. Line 2 would include all the days in between. So say, for example, someone is gone for a 4-day travel. You'd have that first day with the date of the first date of travel with the time of departure. Line 2 will be for days 2 and 3 and would include the per diem that particular individual was going to receive for those 2 days. And then the third line would be dated the final date of travel, and it would include the time of return. So what time that particular individual will return back to their their home base or their original destination. So that will be how you'd want to divide that information in the expense report. The account code for all employee travel in an expense report is 52024. No reimbursement to an employee is allowed prior to the start of travel, so we don't pay anything out before the trip is complete, so please keep that in mind when people are making purchases. It will not be reimbursed until after they go on their trip. And all expense reports must be completed and fully approved prior to an employee's termination. So if you have someone that's coming up close to the date when their term is going to end their contract, you need to make sure that all their expenses are submitted and fully approved and really need to be paid out prior to their termination date. Because once someone is terminating in PeopleSoft, they do not have access to approve anything. And also, if their banking information is wrong, this will cause a lot of issues and problems with them getting their reimbursement. So just keep that in mind when you're working with people, especially if someone's on a contract or a term or things like that, like they're hired on a semester basis. Okay. All right. And so when we're talking about expense reports, probably the number one reason why things will be returned, and this is one reason why things get sent back all the time, is because of meals. People forget to include the time of departure and the time of return when they're submitting their expense reports. And it's very, very important that this information is included, because we need that information to be able to verify the per diem that particular individual will receive for the first day and the last day of travel. And I'm sure you've all seen this before, but this is our meal allowances matrix, and it basically shows you if someone leaves at a specific time. So if they leave before 6:30 in the morning, then they're eligible for those specific meals for that day. So if and the breakdown between the per diem for in-state and out-of-state is the max that can be reimbursed in-state is $35, and that breaks down to $8 for breakfast, $10 for lunch, $17 for dinner, for a total of $35. If it's out of state, the max is $50 a day, and that breaks down to $10, $15, and $25. Make sure that if anyone is traveling to Canada, that the rate that's used by the university is the out-of-state rate. It does not use the rate that the Department of State has on their foreign rate per diem rate table. So just keep that in mind if anybody's traveling to Canada. If there's any foreign travel, the university uses the Department of State guidelines based on country, location, and date. If you haven't accessed that lately and you need a link to it, if you'll just email us in Travel, we can send you that information, or you can always Google it and find the rate table that the Department of State puts up for international destinations. And it's important to remember the time of departure and the time of return. And this is how you're going to determine what meals that particular individual has for the first day and last day of travel. I'd probably print out a little copy of this and keep it on your desk, so that way when you're doing the per diems, it's easy to know, what's going to be included and what's not going to be included. The other thing to remember about meals is that there's no meal reimbursement for one-day travel. It does not matter the destination. If someone goes on a day trip and they do not have an overnight stay, they are not allowed meal reimbursement. So just keep that in mind. All right. So I'm going to pause here a second to see if there's any particular questions about employee travel before I go into the training module to show you how to create a travel authorization and also how to create an expense report.
All right, Jay, do you want me to read those out for you?
Yes, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and switch screens so I can be on the training module screen. So, but
All right, sounds good. Okay, so Kathy is answering the question that Barbara Taylor had and that Mary Peak referenced. She's asking for those grants that allow a certain amount solely for foreign travel, and the PI has to account for that. Is there a way that we can account for the 52025 when doing the expense report? I have one PI in particular who does not like the foreign being lumped into 52024, as it's harder to locate when preparing his report. And so Kathy's response was, we use the default location to track foreign travel.
yes, yes. Okay.
The next question is, students can still be paid ahead of time for registration and plane ticket. And Megan is saying, yes, Jenny, they can still do that for now.
Yes,
And then,
and
go ahead.
let me add a little caveat to that, Joanne. Basically, we want to try to move away from trying to reimburse, people prior to the start of travel, and we want to try to find ways to have that expense be paid by the university. So those are things that we're going to be kind of working toward as we go into the future, so that way we're not trying to process reimbursements prior to the start of travel.
Okay, thank you.
We'll continue to work on that. That's a working process.
Great. Next question is, for final day of travel, is the time of return the time they left or the time they arrive? And how do you take into consideration long layovers? And Megan is saying it would be the time they return to their home or office. This would be the same for their time of departure on the first day of travel.
Exactly. So it would be time wherever they got back to their final destination, so their house or their office and things like that. Because obviously, someone lands at the airport at 9 o'clock, they're not getting home right at 9 o'clock at night. So you have that little bit of time that you take into account. So that would be when you would get to that would be the time of return when they get to their final place where they've stopped for the day.
Okay. Are these the current rates versus $33 and $40 from last year?
So the current rates for per diem are the 35 for in-state travel, which is that max per diem, so the 8, the 10, the 17, and then all out-of-state travel is $50. So it would be 10, 15, and 25. And that was effective 7/1/2019 when those per diem rates came into effect for the state.
Okay. And where's the new allowance table found?
For the per diem rates. It's in the procedures for the it's on the procedures for the procedures PDF on the controller's page under policies and procedures.
Okay. Frequent flyer miles, no dollar. There's a question mark. No dollar amounts.
If you're using your miles to pay for travel, then you don't get reimbursed for that expense because you're using your miles. If that's the question that they're asking.
I'm sure she'll clarify if it's not.
Yeah, if there's specific things that we don't touch on, you can always email us in the travel office, and we may be better able to answer your questions since there's quite a few people on our Teams meeting right now. If there's something very, very specific, you probably want to reach out to us because we've probably heard it before, but just for time constraints, we may not be able to get into every single little detail questions that people have.
All right, so possibly basic question, but these employee travels are reimbursed to the employee's bank info, correct? So the employee is using his or her own funds, and the accounting info would be either the departmental funds or grant funds, or do I have that backward? I've only done non-employee travel paperwork before.
So the way that this would work is the expense report is reimbursing for the employee for expenses that they've paid out from their own finances for travel on behalf of the university. And so when you submit the expense report, you're putting in the expenses based on the receipts that they've given you of what they've paid out, and you're using the accounting details or the chart field information for the money that the university is going to use to reimburse that individual for those expenses that were incurred on behalf of the university.
Okay. If a faculty member has been approved for only a certain amount of meal allowance on a TA, but they end up returning later for that additional meal expense, would you like us to list it, especially for grants, TAPs that have a specific amount set and approved for them?
You can, if there's a certain amount allocated for that travel, you can just put in the comments like only allocated XYZ amount of money for this particular meal, even though they may have traveled to where they could get the full per diem for that particular one, but you're limited by your budget. You just need to note that and make the amount that in your expense report.
Okay, thank you. And let's see. Mary is still back to the 52025 and 52024. Mary, we may take that offline and maybe discuss it.
Yeah, let's have a discussion about that outside of this, because that doesn't really apply to a ton of people. So that might be just give us a phone call in the travel office or an email, and we can have a discussion about that after we get finished.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Any approved method for PIs to cover registration before travel?
A registration can be paid directly to a supplier prior to the start of travel using a payment request. And you'd want to touch base with accounts payable about all the information that's needed for that, and make sure that particular company or entity is set up as a supplier in PeopleSoft. I do not know the time frame for how long that takes, because I don't do any of that. So if you have questions about setting up a supplier or what's needed for that payment request, you want to reach out to the supplier team and AP.
Okay, and then a lot of people are asking about the slide presentation and the recording. We are going to show you where you can find that at the end of this session. It's going to be put out there on the Controller's Office website, and so you'll have access to the PowerPoint presentation as well as a recording of this session. Let's see. Could you please remind us how to pay invoices from approved travel agencies?
That if you charge an airfare to the university, so you call Forest Lake Travel Unlimited, any of the ones that are listed on the travel office's webpage that are approved, you need to make sure that before you make that call, that the travel authorization for the employee in PeopleSoft is fully approved. That means the status says approved. It can't have any other status except approved on it. If it's a non-employee or a student, you have to make sure that that travel authorization is signed and on file with travel prior to making that purchase. And then what will happen is once the TA is approved, the purchase is made, those travel agencies send the invoices to the travel office, and then we take the information from the TA, so the approved chart fields that are for the airfare on those, and we use that to pay the invoices. So when we get our credit card statement, then we pay. We use the accounting details on the travel authorizations to pay those invoices to our credit card.
Okay.
So you're not actually paying any invoices. That's coming to the university, and then we're paying it out based off the information on the approved TA.
Thank you. And Janet, we're actually Jade is actually going to go into a training environment and walk through how to complete an expense report. So she's not sharing a PowerPoint presentation right now. So just hang in there, and she's going to walk through that with you, and we'll get back to the PowerPoint presentation when she's done.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, just for time constraints, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the training environment and show you how to create a travel authorization and an expense report. It's going to be a little quick and dirty just because of time. All right, so I'm in the training environment. I'm going to create a travel authorization for my traveler who is going to Baltimore for a conference from October the 1st through October the 3rd. And the navigation for that is main menu, employee self-service, travel and expense, travel authorization, create, modify, which you can see up here at the top. So whatever the last thing is, that's the page that you're actually on in the system. Just remember, when you're doing a travel authorization, when you're logged in, when you're logged into the system, the USC ID here will default to you as the proxy. So you want to make sure you take that out and find that of your traveler. And there's several ways to do that. You can use their USC ID number, which is really the best thing to use because that is unique to each individual. You can also search by other parameters. You can search by name and things like that. But in this case, I'm actually going to use the person's USC ID number. So that way it will be accurate. and that's going to pull up the particular traveler I want. So I pick traveler 25, and then it's going to change that ID number in this field, and then I'm going to click add. And before I go any further, I want to verify that the name of the traveler is correct. If it's any other name than the person that I want to stop and start over, because you're not able to transfer one travel authorization or expense report to another person. It's tied to the individual. So if the name is not correct, you don't want to go any further. But in this case, I have the right traveler, traveler 25. Then I want to go in and add my report description. In this case, you want to put in what it's for, where they're going, and the dates, if possible. These are just the best practices. So in this case, this particular person is going to a conference in Baltimore. I'm just going to use BWI because that's the airport code there. From 10/1/2021 through 10/3/2021. So that will give me my description, which follows our best practices of what it's for, where they're going, and the dates. Then I'm going to go over and pick my default location. And the default location is going to be driven by where this person is actually going. In this case, they're going to Maryland, so I'm going to pick out of state. And then I need to add my dates. So in this case, these are the actual dates of travel. And for travel authorizations, they're always going to be future dated. So 10/1/2021 through 10/3/2021. So that gives you sort of my travel date. So now I've filled out my header, which is great. Then I need to go down and I need to add my estimated expenses. And the best way to do that is to use the quick fill option. And I want to make sure the date range is the actual dates of travel. So I've got 10/1/2021 through 10/3/2021. And then I want to pick the expense types that I'm going to need in my travel authorization. And this is going to come from what the traveler has given you as to what they think their projected expenses for this particular trip is going to be. I'm going to use the one-day option so that way all I have to do, I'll create one expense line for all the estimated expense types in my travel authorization. So in this case, I need air travel, ground transportation, hotel, meals, and registration, because this is what the individual told me they were going to need for their travel. And then I'm going to click OK. And then when I use my quick fill, what happens is I'm able to include, it populates all the estimated expense lines at one time instead of me having to add them line by line, which is very, very nice. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to put in the description and the estimated amount for each one of the expense lines. So in this case, I'm just going to put that it's airfare from Columbia to Baltimore. So Columbia to BWI, and they estimated this would be $300. Then I'm going to scroll down to my ground transportation. They estimated their Ubers or taxis were going to be $150. Then for the lodging, so for those 2 nights they're away, they said they were going to stay at the Marriott, and it's going to be $300. And then for the meals, it's going to be all day, so you can lump all those into one expense line for the travel authorization. But I'm going to make sure to include in the description time of departure and time of return. So that way when I do my expense report, it'll clue me in to make sure that I know to include that information in the expense report. What time they left on the first day and what time they return on the last day of travel. And I'm going to do $150 as the estimate because that's roughly $50 per day while they're away on out-of-state travel. And then finally, this is registration for the conference, and they estimated that at $100. Okay.
So Jade, is the hotel maximum still $300 per night?
No, the hotel maximum is $371.11. I think that's the exact number. I should have written it down, but it's $371 and some change. Which is in the procedures, which I'll show you where that is in a few minutes when we get to the end, so that way you can see sort of the policies and procedures page. It is adjusted each year in July with the consumer price index. So this year it went up a little bit from what its previous amount was, which was $352 and something. But this is the estimated amount for 2 days, which would be a really good hotel room, like about $150 a day in Baltimore. So that's for the 2 days here. Okay. All right, so I've got all my expenses. It's giving me 5 expense lines for a total of $1,000. But you'll notice that I don't have any accounting details in here. I just have a department and an account code, which defaults based on this person's profile. But I want to put my correct chart field for this particular travel. So I'm going to go to the actions menu. I'm going to go choose action, and I want to go to default accounting, and then I want to click go. And then when I get to this page, I want to enter in my chart field information. And by using this, I'm able to enter in all the details for my chart field, for my accounting details at one time, instead of having to add them line by line, which is very nice. It gives you less ability to sort of accidentally type something incorrectly in and cause you to have an error. And so once I add my chart field, I want to click OK. And then as I scroll through my expenses, you can see that it's added that accounting details to each one of my expense lines, which is very nice. And then I'm going to go back up to the top. And I haven't saved this yet, so it hasn't created a travel authorization number. So I want to click Save for Later. And then once I save it, you can see it's now created my travel authorization number, or this authorization ID. In this case, it's 1 with 4 zeros and ends in 17430, and it's in pending, which means I can still make adjustments and changes to it. I can work on this particular one. I can add expenses, take expenses away. I can change the accounting details. I can change the dates, all that information, which is great. This number is important to remember because if you have questions or if you're looking for something, this is the number you want to contact us or look for in the system. And you want to make sure as you work on your travel authorizations that you're, kind of saving on a regular basis, because if for some reason you get logged out and you haven't saved it, your information is gone. It's not there. You have to start from scratch. So I always say save for later is your friend, because even if it gives you some kind of, weird or red flag, if you save it, you can always come back and work on it again instead of having to start from scratch. So I've saved it. I'm going to scroll through. I don't have any issues with it. I don't see anything that needs to be corrected. If you have any attachments that needed to be added to your travel authorization, so any additional explanations, if someone wants to attach like their itinerary for the conference, things of that nature, you can add it here to the top. And you add the attachments just like you would any kind of attachment to an email. You just choose your file, upload it, and then you want to make sure you hit save again. And then after everything's complete, if you don't have any additional additions you need to make to this, you want to go to Summary and Submit. And when you get to the Summary and Submit, it just kind of gives you a little overview of like what it's for, their default location, their dates, your attachments would be here. If you need to add any additional comments or notes, you can click on the Notes section, and you can type, whatever you want to in here. It's a good place to, like maybe you could say like expenses limited to XYZ amount. We're going to use some money from this department, any kind of thing like that. This is a good place to put that information. I'm going to hit save again since I've made an addition to my travel authorization. And then I'm going to go back to Summary and Submit. I want to check the box. I want to hit Submit for approval. And then when I hit Submit for approval, I want to make sure I get this confirmation. It says Travel Authorization Submit Confirmation. And I want to be able to click OK. If I do not get this pop-up, I need to go back and look to see if there's anything that has caused an error and has been flagged in my travel authorization. Because until I click this OK, so basically the second confirmation, my travel authorization has not been submitted. But now you can see it says your travel authorization has been submitted for approval. In the system, the background processes will run. And then the transaction will go from saying pending, submission in process to saying submitted for approval. And when it's submitted for approval, that means your traveler has now received an email or a notification that says they have something out there that they need to approve in the system. If you want to see where that is, you can click on the approval history. And you can see now it's pending with the traveler, and then it's going to show you the rest of the approval, the routing for the approval that's needed in order for this travel authorization to be fully approved. So you can see that here under the approval history. So that's sort of the quick and dirty way of how you would create a travel authorization. Just remember that the travel authorization needs to be created and fully approved prior to the start of travel. If the travel date has already started, the system will not allow it to go forward in approvals. So nothing can really happen with it. It's especially important that your TA is fully approved if it meets one of those 4 criteria of why a approved travel authorization is required. And also, if you've done all this work, you want to be able to use it in your expense report. You don't want to have to start from scratch. Okay? All right.
So you want to take some questions before you move on?
Sure, that's fine. We can take a few little questions right now, and then I'll show you your how to create an expense report by associating a travel authorization.
Perfect. So is it okay to just do one day, October 1, an example, that is like the lump sum of all the expenses and not individual days on the expense report, or is this just an example?
No, you should break the expenses down by expense type in your travel authorization. You can use one estimated expense line for each one of the expense types. So say they're going to stay at maybe 2 hotels while they're away. You can just lump that as one sum on your travel authorization in one line. But on the expense report, you're going to have to break that out into the individual hotels and the different amounts and things like that. So my suggestion is if you have a lot of detail that your traveler has given you and you know you're going to have a travel authorization, you can go ahead and break it out as in much detail as you would like, so that way when you associate it to your expense report, you've already done a lot of the work in advance.
Okay. If the employee is sharing lodging, do we put their portion of lodging total that they paid or the entire bill amount? In some situations, one person may pay the entire bill and others will reimburse them in their own ways. And Megan's already answered that, saying that each employee should claim their own portion of lodging on their expense report.
Exactly.
And Inga's asking about airport parking. And when a traveler brings airport parking receipt, can I just add it?
What you mean, like just add it? Yeah, you can just add an additional expense line. You would use miscellaneous for parking, and that would be probably dated the last day of the travel because that's the day that they came back and that's when the expense was paid out.
Awesome.
Yes.
How much time should we allow for approval before travel?
Well, that's really going to depend on your travelers and the approvers because if you have someone that has a hard time approving things, like they don't do it automatically, then you may want to give them a little bit more lead time. But you want to make sure that it's fully approved prior to the start of travel. So, if you submitted something and you notice someone hasn't approved it in a day or so, you probably want to give them a call or an email and say, hey, this is sitting out there. Can you approve it? I know in the travel office we send out periodic reminders for things, but due to the volume, it's hard for us to do that for every single thing. So if you're a proxy and you've submitted something for someone, or you're a business manager and you see something just sitting out there and you think it should be in your approval queue, best thing is to call the person that it's pending with or email them and say, hey, you really need to approve this so that way it can move forward. So I mean, it can go through approvals in 10 or 15 minutes if everybody does like they're supposed to. So it's just going to be dependent on the person. I mean, if you think it's going to take a long time, then you should probably, plan for that. But your people better than we would know how people go about the process of taking care of the things they need to approve in people's home.
All right, I have one more question and you can move forward. After
Sure.
submitting a TA and it's approved with payment from a research account, but now the travel needs to be paid from a different account, when do I need to make this change and how do I make the change?
So once a travel authorization is fully approved, you're not able to make any adjustments or changes to it. So the way to rectify that issue is once the travel is complete, you're going to associate that approved travel authorization to your expense report. And then when it's associated to the expense report, you can change the accounting details, so the chart field in that expense report. Because when you associate it to the TA to the expense report, it's going to unencumber that money and turn it into an expense, which is what I'm actually going to show you here in a minute when we go through creating a travel authorization from an approved expense report from an approved travel authorization.
You go for it, Ms.
Okay.
Jade.
All right, sounds good. So the navigation to create our expense report is main menu, employee self-service, travel and expense report, create, modify. So you can see that this is the page that we're on. There's going to be 2 tabs here. We want to create a new one, which we're going to click on add. If you're trying to find an expense report that you've already created or one that's been sent back to you because it needs a correction, you want to click on find an existing value and look for that particular one. But in this case, we don't have one. So I'm just going to make sure to pick the ID of my traveler because right now it's showing it would try to create a travel for me as the proxy instead of my actual traveler. So I want to use my traveler's USC ID number in order to be able to find them in the system. Before I go any further with creating my expense report, I want to verify that the traveler's name is correct, which you can see here. I have the right person. If it's anybody except for the person that you want to stop and start over. You don't want to save anything. You just want to get out of it and find that individual and create an expense report for the right person. So in this case, I already have an approved travel authorization. So I know that I want to associate that approved travel authorization to my expense report. Other times you can create an expense report is they've gone on their trip, they've come back, but they didn't have to have an approved TA. So in that case, you would just start from scratch and just filling all the information out. But in this case, in this scenario, I'm going to actually take one that's approved, the TA that's approved, and associate it to this expense report. So I'm going to go over to my quick start menu, and I'm going to populate from a travel authorization and then click go. Okay. And then when I do that, it's going to show me all the travel authorizations that are available for me to choose for this particular traveler. If it's one where it doesn't give you the ability to select it, that means that it's already been associated to an expense report. If you do not see your authorization here, it means that it's not been approved, so therefore you're not able to associate it to your expense report. So in this case, I'm going to pick the one that ends in 17364, which is a trip from Hong Kong from August the 9th through August the 11th. And then once I hit select, what will happen is it will now populate all that information into my expense report. So instead of me having to do it line by line, instead of, having to start from scratch, I'm already using the information that's there and just bringing it in, and I'm going to make my adjustments and changes based on the paid receipts that the traveler has given me after their trip is complete. So it's populated my report description, conference in Hong Kong, and the dates. It's populated my default location. Now I need to add the actual trip location. So in this case, Hong Kong. I've got my travel dates, so 8/9 through 8/11. You can see my travel authorization is associated to my expense report, which is great. I want to add all my attachments here to the top, so all the paid receipts for this. So in this case, it would need the paid airfare receipt, so it should have their name, the dates, their flight details, their class of service. They'll have their ticket number. It should have the amount that they paid for their ticket and also how they paid for it, so their proof of payment. And in this case, their description, it was a round trip from Colombia to Hong Kong, and their expenses for their airfare was $1,265. I'm also going to have to add my ticket number from the receipt here, so I'm going to have to pick something random because I don't know what it would be, but just something, it would come from the receipt. Then I'm going to go to ground transportation. They said they had Ubers, but they actually ended up only spending $6.42. They had a $50 Hong Kong dollar ride, but with the currency conversion, it ends up being $6.42 on the date of that particular one, which was 8/10. Now for their hotels, the total for that was $600 for their 2 nights that they were away. And then for their meals, on that first day of travel, they departed at this time. Originally they told me 9 a.m., but in this case, they left at 11 a.m. They told me they left at 9. And so that will be $117 for Hong Kong based on the rate that the Department of State sets. Because I've taken out breakfast for that first day because they're not eligible for it because they didn't leave before 6:30 in the morning. For day 2, the max amount they can be reimbursed for their full day of travel is $180, which is based on the Hong Kong rate in August of 2021. And then finally, for the last day of travel, they returned at 9:55. So that was past the 8:30 return time, and their per diem for that day will be $180. So that kind of gives you sort of a breakdown of all the expenses that they would have. My accounting details are correct. If I needed to change the accounting, and this is not what I wanted to use, I would just go back up to the top for my actions, do default accounting for report, and click go. And then I could change the accounting details up here. I could change it to whatever chart that I wanted. And when I click the OK, it would do a mass change at one time for all the details. Okay. Things to remember about international ones, international travel. So I'm going to hit save so that way I can create my report ID here. And you can see it's 60360 and it's in pending. So I continue to make adjustments and changes. Reminders for receipts is they need to have, for lodging, it needs to be itemized and it needs to show the amount paid. For international purchases, so things that are purchased in international currency. So in this case, if they purchase something in Hong Kong dollars, it would have to have the currency conversion attached, and it would need to be on the date of the transaction, so the date it actually took place. So if they purchase something on 8/10/2021, the conversion needs to be on that date. If someone used their credit card statement showing that amount that their credit card was charged in US dollars is really the best thing to use. So that just gives you a quick little way of how you would create an expense report from an approved travel authorization. I've got everything I want. I want to hit summary and submit. I want to make sure all my attachments are there. If I need to add any notes, I can do that here as well. If you need to explain anything, this is a good place to put it. And then I want to check the box, hit submit expense report. Excuse me. I want to make sure I get this confirmation, just like what I did with our TA. And then I want to click OK. And then once I click that OK, it's going to say this has been submitted for approval, and that's going to start the approval process for this expense report. It'll go to the employee, it'll go level 1, level 2, and then the final approval will come to the travel office before, and we have to give our approval before it can be moved to where it will be paid out to the travel. Okay. Any questions about expense reports?
No question. Oh, a couple just popped in. Do we add the additional conversion fee to the charge or as a separate charge?
What do you mean by conversion? You mean like if there's an actual like fee for them to do that? The university typically doesn't pay like if you have an international transaction fee, things of that nature. But you would use the currency conversion for that particular date.
And then you would just include that in that total amount for that specific line, right?
So like if you're, for example, like if it's when you do the conversion, it'll show you like if it's XYZ dollars, it'll pop. If it's XYZ amount in whatever currency, it'll pop out what that is in US dollars.
Perfect. Day of return. If flying home, do we ask them the time they arrived back in Columbia, or do we put the time that they arrived at their home? Some people live over an hour from the Columbia airport.
Yes, so it's the time they get to their actual final destination. So if their final destination is their house, because they've landed in Columbia, but they've got to drive to Newberry or something like that, then it will be the time they get back to their home or their office.
Perfect. You're good to go.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here, and then I'm going to talk about creating. So we've created our travel authorization. We've created our expense report. The next thing I want to talk about is how you would deal with non-employees and students. Now, non-employees and students require a TA for all travel. So it doesn't matter where they're going, they have to have an approved travel authorization. This includes anything that's direct billed to a supplier. So if you're going to pay their hotel expenses, if you're going to pay registration to a supplier for them, they have to have an approved travel authorization, and that needs to be attached to the payment request. And you should use the correct travel account code in that payment request. The TA form can be found on the finance intranet, the admin.sc.edu, which you've probably used before. The navigation to access that is travel authorization, legacy TA, travel authorization quick form, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Make sure when you complete this form, at the bottom of the page, there's a box that you check that says send for confirmation. Basically it's a send for confirmation email, and then it sends you a link to that entry. That is the only way you will be able to access the travel authorization after you already submit it. You want to submit it, print it, and then sign the form, and that form should be sent to the travel office. We now have an email where that information can be sent, tesubmit@mailbox.sc.edu. What will happen is you'll send it to us, we'll get it, we'll verify everything is correct, the signature is good, and then we will send you an email back that says travel has received this, it is now on file. So it's a very good way to keep track of what you've sent and if everything is approved. And this should be done prior to the start of travel for your non-employees and students, so that way everything's taken care of before they actually come on their trip. Okay. And this is what the page looks like when you're on the finance intranet. You can see the navigation up here at the top. It'll show you sort of who created it, your phone number, and all those types of things. You'll have to pick travel as and how they're traveling, so student, different forms of non-employee, interview, things in that nature. What kind of travel they're doing. Then you'll fill out their names, dates, purpose, their destination, what kind of expenses they're going to incur, add the amounts, add your chart field, your total amount. You can see your sent for confirmation email link is checked. You'll hit submit form. It'll pop up. You'll be able to print it out, sign it, and then email it to the travel office. Okay, so that's pretty much what this particular page looks like. Does anybody have any questions about this before I jump into showing you how to do one of these?
We have some questions that are expense report related, so I'm just going to hold off on those and let you finish.
Let's hold those to the end since we're running up close to the end of time. Okay. All right. So let me pull up my. So here I am on the hub. I'm going to go to the travel authorization quick form. Log me out. So I'm on the travel authorization. You can see I'm on the quick form. It's going to give you the information of who's created it up here at the top with your email. I'm going to do travel as, and I'm going to do it as a USC for my USC student. And it's going to be domestic travel, which you can see here. And then for my traveler's name, this is John Smith. You don't have to add the VIP ID. That's just a field that's still here. So if you have that, that's fine. If not, it's not a big deal. Then if you have any additional travelers, so if there's multiple students traveling on one TA, you can add that here. But in this case, I just have one. I want to add my travel dates, which is 10/1. You want to put the purpose of the travel. In this case, it's research for a thesis. And you can get as much detail as here as you want. If you're specific, very specific, it'll be very helpful. And then for this case, my destination city is Baltimore. And then I'm going to go over here and pick the state. So I'm going to find Maryland in my list. And then for the method of travel, in this case, this particular individual is going to fly. So I need airfare, so I need plane. Excuse me. They're going to take some transportation, so they're going to have any kind of transportation there. So they told me their transportation is going to be their ground transportation plus their airfare is going to be $300. Oh, it's going to be $450. Excuse me. Then we're going to have meals. So their estimated meals and lodging are going to be $450 as well. And then we're going to have some registration. I'm going to check that here. And then any kind of other expenses. So in this case, baggage. We're going to estimate that at 100. All right, so I've got all that information in here. So I can see it. And then I want to enter in my operating unit, so my chart field, so all the accounting details. And then the account code will default based on the type of travel that you're picking. And then you need to enter your full amount. So in this case, it would be $10.50 on this particular line. You can see I've got my sent a confirmation email with a link to this entry selected. Then I'm going to click submit form. And then it's going to pop up my travel authorization. I'd want to just print this out so that way I would have it as a PDF, or you could save it as a PDF, whatever. You want to make sure that this is signed, so it needs the department head signature and their name and the date, and then you would email this to the travel office. Or you can send it in campus mail if you like. It just, either one's fine, but most people send them by email now, which is a really quick way for us to get that information. And then you would want to make sure that you did all this before the travel was completed. Okay. Now, if, like I said before, you can put multiple travelers for students or non-employees on a travel authorization. If there's not enough room for all the names on the create page, when you send your travel authorization, just include an extra sheet with additional names on it too, with your travel authorization. Okay. All right. So that's basically how you would create a travel authorization in the finance intranet for students and non-employees. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Are electronic signatures allowed?
We do take those, yes, because sometimes, people don't have the ability to actually sign them, so they should be that digitally verified signature.
Okay. If I'm taking 30 plus students on a trip in which we will take a bus and cover all expenses except lodging with a cash advance, would I still complete a TA for these students?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's all of the questions regarding that form.
Okay, dokie. All right, well, let me pull up my PowerPoint again. And then the other things I want to talk about for this are just for non-employees and students, the way that they're reimbursed is using a TRV or a travel reimbursement voucher. That form's on the controller's office webpage under travel. You can download it there. It's just a PDF that you fill out. The TRV needs to be completed, so it needs to have the name of the person, a valid address where their check can be sent. It needs to include the correct TA number at the top right of the page. All the sections need to be filled out with the dates they traveled, the time of departure and the time of the return, the destination, so where they started, where they're leaving from, and where they're going to, the meals, lodging, all that stuff needs to be filled out. It needs to be signed by the traveler and also by the authorized approver, so it needs 2 signatures on that particular page. And that form and all the receipts can be emailed to the travel office at tesubmit@mailbox.sc.edu. Now, just to get into some other things that we're going to talk about, just some policy and procedure reminders, is that airfare is economy only. That's what the university reimburses or pays for. The max for hotels is $371.11 per night, plus any taxes and fees. So this is the actual room rate for that particular lodging. If it's anything $371.11 or below, you're good to go. If it's above that, you got to do some math to figure out some certain things. Itemized receipts are required for lodging. No lodging is allowed within 50 miles of your official headquarters and/or place of residence. The current mileage rate is 52 cents per mile. There's no mileage reimbursement within 10 miles of an employee's official headquarters and/or place of residence. And things like ride sharing for Uber, Lyft, and other types of services are allowed with a receipt. So these are all things that have been in effect for quite a while. When claiming a reimbursement for an expense report that are in foreign currency, just make sure you include the amount in U.S. dollars on your expense report, and the rate of exchange is documented. So therefore, you need the documentation of how you converted that amount from whatever the local currency it was purchased into U.S. dollars, and that exchange rate should be on the date of the transaction. There's no inclusion of personal travel into any of the business travel for the university. Only employee expenses are reimbursed, so no spouses and/or dependent expenses can be reimbursed. If you have any study abroad, that does not go through travel. That goes a totally different way. And reimbursements for travel will be made after the trip is complete, and it should be submitted within 7 days of the return from the trip. And that may seem like a short time frame, but really, if there's some issues or someone doesn't have a receipt and they need to get something, the quicker they try to get it after their trip is complete, the much easier it is to do that. The further out you go, the harder it is to get documents that they did not get at the time when they actually traveled. Okay. And if you're trying to find information about the travel office, you'd want to go to the controller's office and go under general accounting and then click on travel. And this will bring you to the page that has all the information about travel, the different travel advances, the agencies that people can use. There's a little quick reference guide that helps you with some things that you can do in PeopleSoft for different, how to cancel a TA, how to delete things of that nature, stuff we don't have a chance to really touch on now. The link to the TRV is here, as well as information about how employees update their banking information in the system. And then here's our contact information. So if you have just general questions about travel, please email our TE office box. This is just sort of general travel questions like, how do I do this? Or, is this allowed, things of that nature. If you're submitting any TAs or TRVs for non-employees and students, please send it to the TE Submit mailbox. This is a link to the Controller's Office travel page, so that way you can find out all things related to travel. And then there's the link to the travel policy, which is the policy for the university, the big overarching policy. And then there's a link to the travel procedures, which basically breaks down things into more details. So just keep that in mind.
Jay, can you go back to the previous slide? So guys, you're asking about the webinar and training information. So if you can see here, yes, that's right. It's going to be under webinars and training under general accounting. And that's where we're going to have the recording for this session and the PowerPoint presentation as well.
Yes, exactly. So this is a good place if you need to know anything about, the controller's office. All our stuff is here, but travel is under general accounting. And like Joanne said, the webinar will be, our recording today will be under this webinar and training page. If for some reason you can't find it, you can email us in travel. We'll send you the link to it. Okay.
All right. You ready? Ready?
Yes. Okay. Let's go ahead and hit up the questions. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of them, so that's okay. So let me pull up the chat. So go ahead.
All right. So the first question is the currency converter shows one rate and credit cards use another. Which one should we use? And Megan already said, Inga, if they have a credit card statement, this should be used. It is the most accurate.
Yes, because that's really going to be the date that the company, your credit card, converted that amount to the US dollars. So that if you use a credit card, you really should use that because that's the most accurate. If you pay with cash, then you really want to use your currency converter.
Okay. If someone took 8 different Ubers, can we have one line on the expense report with all of the Uber expenses added together?
It depends on where they're traveling. If they're doing on an international trip, then it has to be divided out by the dates because they're going to be different dates. But if you have multiples like that, if it makes sense to combine them, you can. But if it's going to be more confusing because there's so many different ones, maybe if they have 2 or 3 on the same date, you combine those together on the same date. But if they're different ones over 4 or 5 dates, you probably want to divide them out between the different dates and then do your attachment the same way, or organize them so that way it makes sense that these are all on 9/8 and these are all on 9/9, things of that nature.
Okay, perfect. Quick question: we no longer need to submit a travel memo, correct?
What do you mean travel? Oh, like you mean like an essential travel memo? No. As of 7/1/2021, all travel is back to normal. So if you're submitting any travel that was prior to that, you're going to need that signed essential memo. But anything 7/1/2021 forward is just travel as normal.
All right. Let's go down further. So can we submit a TA for an employee if it's domestic travel under 5,000, or should we wait to do the expense report after the trip?
It's going to depend on your department because the policies that I'm talking about are the large ones for the university. But I always try to say, and I should have said it at that point, is each department, area, college may have a lower threshold of why you would need a travel authorization. So you really want to check with your business managers, department heads, and chairs to see if you're going to need one for that particular one, because different places want you to have different things.
Okay. What steps do you take if a non-employee TA was not submitted prior to travel?
So in that case, you would create one, you would submit it to the travel office, and you would have to include a late memo with that travel authorization as to why it was not submitted prior to the start of travel, and that should be signed by your department head.
Okay. Will you reimburse tip for Uber, etc.?
That isn't, you can reimburse tips for that. That's part of the miscellaneous expense. It's part of what's allowable. It's a reasonable allowable tip. So most of those are like $2 or $3, things of that nature.
Okay. Do we still need to include the travel expense authorization ad hoc signature form on the expense report?
If you're using money from 2 different departments, then yes, but generally most people don't have those anymore.
Okay. What about extra leg space for extremely tall people in planes that might not be in economy class?
Economy class is what the university is paying for. If there's a specific situation, then you want to reach out to us in travel, and we'd have to discuss what's going on.
Okay. All right. Any ETA on the restart of the travel cards?
Communications for the travel card will be going out here in the future, so just be on the lookout for those.
Okay. And Meredith is asking if we can email this PowerPoint presentation.
Well, it's going to be on the webpage on the recording, so you should be able to access it like that.
Yeah.
But if you really, really need it, you can just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to send it to you.
What about ad hoc forms for splitting accounting? Are they still needed? And you just spoke to that.
Yes. And some people still like to use those. If you like to use them, feel free to do them. It's perfectly fine. Some people like to have people to sign off on it, and we see sort of a mix of things that come to the travel office.
Okay. I have a staff member who's completing a TA for student travel. He has used all available lines in the TA, even after doing the save for later and coming back. He notes he is unable to add more students. Can he add a Word document that lists the other names and VIP so they can be noted with the same TA number?
Yes. So if you don't have enough, I think before you could add tons of names. Now I think it's maybe like 5 or 10. I don't know the exact number. If you have more students than what you need, then when you print off your TA and you have it signed, when you submit it to the travel office, just include the additional names on in that document. So, write up a memo like these additional students need to be added to it, and just submit that with the signed TA as one attachment to the team submit mailbox.
Okay. All right. That's the end of the questions.
Okay. And I will just say that I'm glad that all of
Another one. What documentation is needed to reimburse students and our faculty for mileage?
You do not have to include a mileage map. Some people like to include that, but it needs to be more than 10 miles from the employee's residence and or headquarters.
Okay.
So I just want to say thank you for all of you joining us today. I will just say, if you have any questions or concerns about travel, or you're not sure about how to do something, or whatever it might be, please reach out to us in the travel office. We'd rather help you in advance instead of have to figure out how to work around things after something's already happened. If you have any questions, always go back to the policies and procedures, because those are the guiding documents for everything. So start with your policy and then look at your procedure. And if you need anything, just let us know. It was very nice to see y'all. Well, see you. Chat with all of y'all today. So if you need anything, just let us know. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day.